Our objective today is twofold. First, to ensure that the McGuinty government is held accountable for its failure to exercise proper oversight of Ontario's air ambulance services and for allowing public health care dollars to be used to subsidize a web of private businesses while allowing the level of service to patients to deteriorate. Second, we want to put the management and the directors of Orange and its several for-profit affiliated companies that have been spawned through the cross-subsidization of public health care dollars on notice, that we'll be taking every step available to us to expose what we believe has been nothing short of a breach of trust by an organization that was entrusted to deliver Ontario's air ambulance services. Since we first raised concerns about the business practices of Orange back in April of last year, we've heard from numerous past and current employees and contractors of Orange who have provided specific information concerning questionable business practices that have resulted in the leveraging of public health care funding to the benefit of a growing empire of private for-profit companies. All the while, the standards and quality of air ambulance services in our province is eroding. With regard to the recent claims by the Minister of Health that she was not aware that there were problems at Orange, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Minister was warned about the questionable business practices at Orange, and the lack of accountability and oversight, and the potential cross-subsidization of for-profit companies by public health care dollars on 3 separate occasions in the legislature, on April 5th, April 13th, and again on the 21st of April. But rather than act on the information we provided and the warnings that public health care dollars were subsidizing the empire building that was going on under the cover of Ontario's public air ambulance service, the Premier, the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Finance insisted that Orange was in full compliance with its accountability agreement with the Ministry of Health. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is, stakeholders have also made numerous attempts to alert the government to the fact that Orange was not meeting its obligations as set out in its agreement with the Ministry of Health, and they were also ignored. As early as July 2008, MPP Michael Gravel forwarded a letter of concern to the then Minister of Health, David Kaplan, who also dismissed the concerns raised by simply referring those complaints and the complainants back to Orange itself. Contrary to the insistence of the Premier, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Health that all is well, the fact is that the government has received numerous warnings that standards of service were being compromised and that public health care dollars were being leveraged to spawn this web of private companies whose boards are populated with individuals who should have known better than to allow such an abuse of public funds. In addition to ignoring our call for an investigation months ago, the government's successive ministers ignored letters from stakeholders who provided first-hand information about questionable business practices that were becoming common practice at Orange. Following the government's refusal to act on our concerns, as we raised in the legislature, I met with the Auditor General and conveyed to him copies of the letters, emails, and notes of meetings that I conducted with present and past employees of Orange. I'm continuing to pass along information as I receive it, as I continue to receive that information almost on a daily basis. I was encouraged to learn that his investigation now continues, and I'm confident that while the government may have turned a blind eye to our warning, it won't be able to ignore the Auditor General's report when it's released. One of those letters was sent to the Minister of Health on May 4, 2011 by the Ontario Air Transport Association. I've asked that it be delivered to you. I assume that you have it in hand. This letter lists numerous examples of how Orange has failed to meet the very basic terms of its agreement with the Ministry of Health. As recently as this past week, individuals have come forward with first-hand information concerning both the business practices at Orange and a continuing erosion of standards of service. As the information we've been given is highly sensitive, we're consulting on the most appropriate way to make that information public and to whom, in fact, that information should be most appropriately directed, with a view to protecting the sources of that information from recrimination and to ensure the integrity of the information itself. Suffice it to say that we consider the circumstance at Orange very serious and based on the government's track record of ignoring what are clearly breaches of its agreement with Orange. We simply don't have the confidence that the minister will take the necessary steps to restore confidence in Ontario's air ambulance services. And that's why we're calling on the Premier today to do two things. First, to direct the minister to immediately suspend any further restructuring and organizational changes that are planned by Orange, and immediately install an oversight team at Orange pending the outcome of the several investigations and audits that are taking place currently, including the tabling of the Auditor General's report on Orange. Second, we're calling on the government to strike an all-party select committee that would be given the authority to call witnesses for the purpose of getting to the bottom of what is going on in this organization. Pleased to take any questions. Well, look, it's not up to us to ask for a minister's resignation at this point. I think it is up to the Premier to direct the minister to ensure that the right thing is done. Under her watch, in fact, under previous health ministers' watches, this organization has been given a carte blanche. If you read the letter that I've distributed, you'll see that essentially what the government has given this organization is an absolute monopoly over every aspect of the operations of air ambulance. There is no oversight. They are basically now an entity unto themselves. The Ministry of Health has absolutely abdicated its responsibility. This now is an opportunity for the minister to step forward, to take the appropriate action. We're calling on the Premier to ensure that that's done.
What can you tell us about this bombshell information that you have? Can you say anything about the nature of the information?
I can simply tell you that based on what we have seen, much of it involves the floating of bond issues for the purpose of purchasing helicopters, which we're told were actually unnecessary. It has been the practice of Ontario's air ambulance service to contract out these services to private operators. There are a number of reasons why that is an appropriate way to do that. First of all, it's a competitive process. And what has happened now is that under Orange, all of the contracts that are being let are being given to itself. And so the competitive nature of these services is gone. Second, there are some agreements that we have had access to that are between one of the for-profit companies of Orange and Augusta, the company from which they purchased helicopters, of a substantial amount in the multi-millions. And one has to question why a company would pay back a consulting agreement to an affiliated company from which a $200 million plus contract was awarded to that company. There are many ways that we could describe an agreement like that. We hesitate to do that at this point, but we are saying that there are serious questions about this. It calls, in my opinion, for an investigation, not only by the Ministry of Health, not only by the Auditor General, but it may have to go further than that.
But did you hand it over to the police? Or, I mean, how long have you had this information? Why haven't you handed it over to the police?
As I say, we're in the process of, first of all, ensuring the integrity of the information. We think that's a responsible thing to do. And we'll make decisions based on the advice that we get.
So if you're not sure about the integrity, why do you talk about it now?
You really know it's true?
Well, I have the agreement, and my question is, it's very recent, we will be determining what we do with that information, and if we feel it's appropriate to hand it over to someone beyond the Auditor General and the Ministry of Health, and we will do so, I assure you.
It's not good enough. It's not good enough to give it to the police yet, but it's good enough to talk about it now. What's the difference?
Well, look, I'm happy to give anything to the police, but I think before we do that, we want to ensure that we have as much information to go along with that contract, and that it's something that is in fact appropriate to pass on at that point. I think at this point we're simply saying.
How can you pass it on now? You're like, how it can be appropriate to pass it on now to us, suggesting that you have some dark allegations here, but then say, well, it's not firm enough to go to the police yet, but I can talk about. It's kind of casting aspersions on these guys, isn't it?
Well, it is. Here's what I'm doing. I'm calling into question some of the transactions that have taken place at this organization, and we'll see where that leads us.
Why not just hand it over to the police, though, and let them investigate? Aren't they, like, no offense, Frank, but aren't they better investigators than you guys? They're cops.
Well, one certainly hopes so, and, you've raised a good point. As I say, this information has just come to my attention, and we'll certainly be passing it on to the appropriate people as we see appropriate.
Frank, the structure of Orange is really complicated, right? It's really confusing, but it also allows them to keep a lot of things secret. Is the auditor limited by what we can search for because of the?
Well, we believe so, and quite frankly, it's one of the reasons that we think at this point in time it would be appropriate for us to strike a select committee of the legislature that would have some broad parameters, would give us an opportunity to call witnesses, ensuring that the people who come forward have the appropriate protection. It is a complex organization that's evolved. When you consider that it's evolved from nothing, from the time that this organization was handed over by the former Minister of Health, Mr. Smitherman. We now have a very complex organization that is handling multi-millions of dollars, starting with $150 million annually of taxpayers' money, the spawning of private corporations from that. When I raised the issue in the legislature that without question there has to be a cross-subsidization of these private companies from the Ministry of Health funding that they're receiving. The minister, of course, denied that. The facts are that employees who were being paid by Orange, by the not-for-profit company, were in fact doing work that affected these for-profit companies. And there is no denying that. And it starts with Mr. Mazza himself, the president, who didn't even appear on the sunshine list, but represents himself on their website and all the documentation as the senior person in control of the entire web of companies. And so, and as you know, I was personally threatened with a lawsuit for even having raised the issue and having made reference to what I consider to be an inappropriate use of taxpayers' dollars by this organization. And I'll probably receive another one following this press conference. But I believe that we have a responsibility to the taxpayers of this province. We see something here that we think is highly inappropriate. And we see, worst of all, a government that has ignored it. As I said from the beginning, they ignored our warning in the legislature through 3 different times. They are not responding to very specific letters. The letter that I've distributed today from the Ontario Air Transport Association has not been responded to by the Minister of Health. And so what is going on here? Why the silence? Why the refusal? You know, this always frustrates me. Government is not there to defend the indefensible. And they shouldn't be defending an organization that is mandated to deliver a public ambulance service. at the slightest inclination that something may be wrong, they should be in there, they should be calling people up on the carpet, they should be challenging them, not defending them, and not assisting in covering things up. That's our concern.
Why not wait until the Auditor General has released his report?
Well, I think what we want to do is assist the Auditor General. The Auditor General is doing his report, but I also believe that the Auditor General is limited in some ways in terms of his own scope. We want to ensure that as much information is available to him as well as to the public. At the end of the day, this government has shown that the only way that they will act is if there is public pressure. And what we're hoping to do today is to create some public awareness of what is going on, the lack of response from the government of the day to something that should be evident to anyone who has even the basic information about, first of all, the contract between the government and Orange, their failure to execute, and all of the concerns that have been tabled on an ongoing basis for a number of years now, really, by stakeholders.
Frank, I've lost track of this a bit. Is the Auditor General doing a special report where he reports just on his own on this, or is he waiting until next December when he releases his whole annual report, and this would be maybe a chapter in it?
It's my understanding that the Auditor General initially intended that Orange would be part of his report this past year. He, as I understand it, has made the decision to put some more effort into this report, and I believe that he will be releasing a report specific to Orange.
When did you find out this information?
With regard to the Auditor General?
No, the bond stuff and other potentially criminal.
I received that on the weekend.